Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Wednesday, March the 5th. Zach Ewing here with Advocate LSU baseball beat writer Koki Riley. I hope everybody had a happy Mardi Gras. If you're still recovering, Godspeed. I know a few people who are still recovering from the holidays. But Koki, you just watched baseball and traveled between baseball games. That's what you do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, technically, I didn't have the holiday because I was at work and getting paid. But like, is it really work when you're just going to baseball games, right?
You can't say that too loud around here. People would be like, Koki doesn't think it's work. And no, I'm kidding. In all seriousness, LSU baseball celebrated the holiday weekend by moving to number one in the D1 baseball poll. Still, are they two in some of the other polls?
Yeah, there are two in the other polls, pretty much.
Tennessee or LSU is basically 1 versus 2. And I think you could actually make a pretty good argument for Tennessee based on just what we've seen so far this year. But we know the way polls work. If you started higher and you keep winning, you're going to stay higher. LSU is now 12-1, and I don't. Just because I think you can make an argument for Tennessee does not mean I think it's undeserving. I think LSU is off to a great start and has every chance to be number one at the end.
Yeah, I mean, if you put a gun to my head, I'd probably pick Tennessee just because they've looked like the better team so far. Even last night where they were in a tight game with Radford, it was 9-9. They ended up scoring like 11 runs and won the game like 22-9 or something crazy like that. They had like three grand slams, which is wild. But anyway, like they've just looked really, really impressive so far to start the year, but I don't think that should take too much away from LSU. Even there's been some wild performances, results here and there. There was the loss, but overall they've looked like a really good team. So LSU I'm talking about, obviously. So
I mean, look, does it matter if you're number one versus number two on March 5th?
No. That'd be my other point. Like, this doesn't matter really.
It's a thrill to see the little number next to your team's name. I get that, but that's about all it is at this point. The idea at the end of the year, at the end of the regular season, is to be in position. We talked about this with Reed with women's basketball. Kim Mulkey isn't too concerned with exactly what seed they get for the national tournament. You just want to be healthy and you want to get a protected seed, which in baseball means top 8.
Yes. Exactly, or at the very least, top 16, where you're at least hosting the regional. But you want to be locked into hosting that super as well. So top 8 should be this team's goal, and right now they look like a top 8 team. I think it's very safe to say that.
Yeah. So LSU is number one, and speaking of games that were tied 9-9, they played their first game as number one last night at the box, and just about lost. They fell behind 7-1 to North Dakota State, who came in at 1-9. And again, we've talked about this. Like, midweek baseball games are not the best judge of a team. I mean, obviously you want to win every game you can, but you don't have your regular pitching rotation set up. You're off of schedule. The weather was terrible all day yesterday, and there was a question as to whether the game would even be played. So North Dakota State was in town. They did play, and when they got out there, the Bison jumped all over the Tigers.
Yeah.
Interesting nature matchup there, by the way.
It is an interesting nature matchup. Who do you think would win in a battle?
Boy, I'm telling you what, man.
I know this is like a TikTok question.
I have the utmost respect for tigers. It's probably my favorite animal. Bison are freaking huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I lean bison, but
I don't know that. Like, could the tiger inflict enough damage before the bison just like tired it out? And I mean, the bison just run away. It's not going to eat the tiger or anything.
Yeah,
but it's interesting.
It's probably stronger, though, I'd imagine.
Leave it in the comments. Tigers versus bison, I guess.
Yeah, someone who actually knows things about animals. I'd love to hear their actual thoughts on this. But anyway, yeah, this is the total side. But
producer Alex, raise your hand if it's tiger.
I'm going with tiger
She's going tiger for the agility. Okay.
All right.
I think that's fair because there is a chance that tiger. But anyway, in this case, it was the bison that hopped out to the lead, 7-1 after I think middle of the third inning. It was 7-1.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine probably not a huge crowd on Mardi Gras in not great weather out there, but
it was a little bigger than I thought it would be, honestly.
People looking around the ballpark going, "This wasn't supposed to happen."
Yeah, absolutely. It was bad defense. It was wild pitches. It was a little bit of everything, and just about as ugly as you could, possibly imagine the start of a game being. I think LSU had 3 errors, and one of the errors that didn't even count was a pop out in the first inning, at one point, there was a pop out in foul territory, and Jared Jones and Kate Arambidi miscommunicated on the play, and the ball just sort of dropped. No one was even within a foot of the ball, and it was just it created a lot of groans and moans out of the crowd after that play, and it was kind of like the perfect encapsulation of just how poorly things were going for them, and kept on going for them over the next few innings. I mean, they were down 9-5 in the fourth inning. They were down 7-1 in the third. But I think this team offensively, especially since the start of the Texas trip, has really, really turned things around, and turned things around since the last time we spoke on this podcast. And the fact that they've had at least 10 hits in their last now 5 games. So offense, they're really getting on base too. They're walking a whole ton, and when you're creating that much offense, you can get yourself out of these holes pitching wise. And I mean, that was kind of a theme in Texas against much better competition, but it was also a theme last night. So I think like the growth of the offense, especially since last season, and obviously since that Omaha game that they lost, is something that's like a big difference between what we've seen so far this year and what we saw at the beginning of last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's the mark of a good team, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. We saw that with Tennessee. And again, just to finish the story here, LSU comes back from that 7-1 deficit, eventually ties the game at 9, and then scores 2 runs in the 8th inning to win 11-9. Is your takeaway from that, and the teams play again tonight, by the way, at the box. It's kind of a little 2-game midweek set. Is your takeaway from that, boy, what a resilient team with a great offense that is never out of a game, or is your takeaway, man, that was sloppy, and if LSU is going to get where it needs to go, that can't happen?
I mean, a little bit of both. Like, if you play that sloppy, you're gonna lose most of the time. Especially if they play like that in an SEC game, which is kind of harder to imagine since those are weekend games, and guys are always up for those weekend games. And again, this was a midweek game coming off of a long road trip. A long, emotional, exciting road trip that we'll get into in a bit. So it was a decent spot for a letdown game, and that's exactly what you saw at the beginning of the game. So, but yeah, like I mean, that level of play just isn't acceptable. Again, it was hit batters, it was wild pitches, it was a lot of free bases given up by the pitching staff, and it was a really perplexing performance from Connor Ware, given how dominant he was in his first 2 starts of the year. Gave up 1 hit in his first 2 starts. It was a home run in the 5th inning against Dallas Baptist. And Dallas Baptist is a good team. They just blew out Oklahoma, which is a top 10 team. So like, I mean, to see him really struggle with the walks and the hit by pitches, he had 5 combined free passes. If you combine those 2 stats together, like that was really, really perplexing, even though his defense didn't really help him out. But like you kind of knew that whoever they were going to bring in after him weren't guys who were necessarily going to be like go-to guys in the weekend. So the struggles just kind of continued from there. And what really helped stop the bleeding for them in the pitching side of things was Chandler Dorsey, who is a South Florida transfer. We really haven't talked about him much at all because he hasn't pitched yet this year, and it wasn't because of injury. It's just because he was toward the bottom of the totem pole heading into the season because he just didn't have a very good preseason. And Jay sort of talked about this after last night's game, and then he comes into the game and he gave up 2 inherited runners. One was on a pass ball, one was on a wild pitch that probably should have been blocked. And Kate Arambidi was the catcher last night. He had a really, really tough game defensively, with giving up wild pitches, which is obviously that's like half that's on the pitcher. Obviously, at least half of it's on the pitcher. But you ideally want your guys blocking some of those balls. But anyway, with Dorsey, he pitched really, really well. Like those 2 inherited runners scored, but he was in a tough spot, and a couple of those balls probably should have been blocked. And he threw 2 shutout innings despite being probably no more than the 10th or 11th guy in the totem pole when it came to their bullpen. So that was a good sign. Then Zach Cowan came into the game, really shut things down for 2 2/3 innings, and he's been one of their best relievers all year so far. So I'd say that like you can't play that ugly, and expect to win. But I think it was a good sign in the fact that like this team has the offense to overcome a bad night on the mound, which just wasn't the case last year for most of the year.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference, that pitching depth too. Like having the offense, but you have to have some guys down the ranks in the bullpen, down your hierarchy, who can come in and quiet a game down on the other end if you're going to come back. And you talk about some of these guys who haven't even pitched. This was LSU's 5th game in 7 days. Tonight's their 6th game in 8 days. So this is, outside of like the SEC tournament, going to be their busiest stretch of games, because then they get Thursday off, but then they're right back at it against North Alabama this weekend. So it's going to be 9 games in 12 days.
Something like that.
By the time we get to Sunday. So,
and that's not to say that there aren't concerns with some concerns with some of these guys. Like ideally, you'd want DJ Primo to pitch better. He came in relief in this game. Ideally, you'd want Jaden Newt to pitch better, who came in relief in this game. But I don't know if those guys. Again, it's hard. We'll talk about this later, but it's hard to judge the bullpen when it's not fully formed yet.
Yeah, that's fair. But I do think it's a good sign to have a guy who hasn't pitched come in and say, "Hey, when you need me, you can count on me." If that means there's injuries, if that means guys throw too many pitches on a Friday game and you need them on Sunday, and obviously for the postseason SEC tournament and regional weekend, and even in Omaha where you're playing all of these games and you may need some of those guys. So it's a good deal. Hey, we're going to take a quick 30-second break. When we come back, we will break down the Tigers' very successful trip to Texas and exactly what went right for LSU up in the Dallas area.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built, ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
Okay, welcome back. Talking with Koki Riley here, LSU baseball up to number 1. Subscribe to our LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel and sign up for notifications for whenever we post a new video. Going to start doing some baseball post-game shows. We're going to give it a shot, Koki, at some point. In fact, actually, first we may have some women's basketball NCAA tournament post-game shows too. It's all in the cards coming up.
That all sounds very, very exciting. The women's basketball shows, that'll be really interested to see how far they go in the tournament and whatnot, and for baseball, obviously, and sort of getting those recaps of some of these big games, potential regional games. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, speaking of big games, LSU had its biggest non-conference weekend of the season last weekend. In fact, the non-conference season, by the way, is just about over. You have tonight's game, you have the 3 this weekend against North Alabama, and then you have a midweek game next week against Xavier, and then it's SEC play. So we're getting there. The week in Texas really I don't think could have gone a lot better for LSU. Obviously, you win all 4 games, start with that against quality competition, beating Dallas Baptist, beating Kansas State, beating Nebraska, and then taking care of Sam Houston on Sunday. But also just from a standpoint of, I think LSU flashed a lot. They flashed some pitching. They certainly flashed some hitting. They played some close games. They dominated a game against DBU. I mean, you saw just a little bit of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, like this is going to be a theme where I was just really encouraged by the offensive performances in all these games. I think part of it has to do with the environments, and like the strike zones were really tight, especially in the Frisco tournament, which when the strike zone's that tight, you're forcing pitchers to, throw it over the plate even more. And what I mean by over the plate, I mean right down the middle, and that creates just more hittable pitches. And it was pretty warm over there in Texas that weekend, so the ball was traveling really, really well, and the batters' eyes were really, really good because they were playing in professional parks. So hitters could just see the ball out of pitchers' hands more easily. So like there were a lot of offensive advantages, and you saw that not just for LSU but for the other teams as well. So just sort of created this environment where you were going to get more offense, and combine that with not having Gavin Guidry and having to pitch Connor Ware in a midweek game. LSU was kind of left with this sort of lighter bullpen. And you really saw that in the Sam Houston game, where they really couldn't put Sam Houston away and sort of win that game via a run roll, even though they scored 7 runs in the second inning. But I think it's just sort of hard to judge the bullpen when they don't really have all their pieces and they can really go in on a weekend like you can during SEC play. So it's kind of hard to judge where they're at right now, and especially when like a lot of their a lot of the bullpen numbers are kind of inflated by that Sunday game where they were pitching guys who just realistically probably aren't going to pitch much, if at all, during an SEC weekend series. So with that in mind, and we can get into the starters in a bit too, but with that in mind, with the bullpen, like I don't say it didn't matter because obviously it did to at least to some degree, and it did in the Kansas State game where they almost lost because of some of their bullpen struggles. I believe in that. Was it the 6th or 7th inning where they gave those 3 runs and sort of sacrificed that 3-run lead that they had? But again, like the offense just kind of carried them this weekend. They were the leading force for this team, and kind of go down the line, like Danny Dickinson has the massive game against Kansas State. It's the 3-run home run to give him that 3-run lead to make it 5-2. Derek Curiel got on base in 16 of 24 plate appearances, which
Freshman.
which is absurd. Yeah, it's just absolutely absurd. As a true freshman, he has become their answer for the leadoff spot. He's just the perfect guy to throw out there because of how often he's able to get on base.
I think, and it's still very early in Derek Curiel's career, but based on what we've seen so far, obviously the competition's going to get better. He's going to slump at some point. It happens to everybody. But I think he's one of those guys that by the end of the year, you're going to be like, he's how old? He's only, is he even
like
19 yet? Yeah, he's 19 years old, and you're going, he's up there like he's a 24-year-old, and you're going, how is this guy still playing college baseball? He's 19. LSU's got him for 2 more years.
Yeah. Well, actually, they only have him technically for 1 more year because he's a draft-eligible sophomore. Okay. So he's a little bit older.
Thank you for that clarification.
And maybe that probably explains a part of what's going on here in terms of how polished he is, but the fact that he is a little bit older. But it's still his first year in college baseball, right? Like, this is impressive. If anyone was doing this, it would be impressive. But the fact that this is the first time he's facing this level of competition makes it even more impressive. Again, even though he is a little bit older. But he is kind of the perfect leadoff guy for them because of just how well he's been able to get on base and set things up for Jared Jones, who's been getting on base a ton himself. And also, I think I saw the stat. He averaged 109 miles per hour on his hits. Jared Jones did over this Texas series. He hit one double at 116 miles an hour in Frisco. He was just raking the ball. No home runs, but just a lot of hard hit doubles. Then Stephen Milam, he's been on a tear really since the end of that Omaha series. And when you have all these different contributors and you're getting, the odd hit or two there from a Tanner Reeves or a Chris Stanfield, then all of a sudden you're putting up, 10, 11 hits and 7, 8, 9, 10 plus runs a game. And that's kind of where the offense is right now.
Yeah. They have traffic in every inning.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many 1, 2, 3 innings have they had all year long? LSU's offense.
Well,
I'm putting you on the spot.
They had
the
more
Omaha
at the
series,
start.
they did. Yeah. But I mean, like they had the one game. But even in that game, they were walking a bunch. I mean, it wasn't like it was all 1, 2, 3 innings. But they just seem to have traffic every time you look up or you look for an update or whatever. They've got 2 runners on, and you're just one hit away from plating a couple.
Yeah, and lately they've been getting that hit. They're not always going to get the hit. Even the 2023 team, if we remember, they struggled with hitting with runners in scoring position as well. What Jay Johnson's offense does so well is that they put a lot of guys and runners in scoring position because of the amount of walks, because of the patience that they show at the plate. But whether they're driving those guys or not has a lot to do, A, with the talent that's on the field, and B, just like how those guys are feeling, right? Like how hot are they? How well are they seeing the ball? And they struggled with runners in scoring position in 2023 during the SEC tournament. So like it can happen to anybody. And I'm not saying that, right now they're on a heater. I say that to say that like right now they're on a heater when it comes to just driving guys in. And, Dickinson, Milam, Jones, whoever it is, it seems like they're just doing a really good job driving guys in. Even if they're not getting the hit, it's a sac fly from Chris Stanfield. It's a sac fly from Jake Brown. It's a ground ball that scores the runner. They're doing a lot of that sort of stuff too, and they're also playing a lot of small ball. So the home runs aren't totally there for this team. They've hit a few here and there, and they've had the odd, and the home run really helped them out last night, actually. Cater Embiid hit his first career homer, and then Daniel Dickinson his 4th homer of the year, and the power that he's showing is really promising for them. But But like overall, like the traffic that they're putting in the bases, as you said, like that's been the strength of the offense.
Well, and the last time that we had a full baseball podcast, we talked about this offensive drought they had against Omaha, and that's what happens when they're not on a heater, right? Like, and then it's frustrating, and you're going, God, they leave a guy on second in every single inning, and that will happen. It's baseball, but it's encouraging because if the traffic is consistent, if you're getting the runners on consistently, even when you're not getting a bunch of big hits and you're on a heater, you're going to score a few runs. And then that leads us to the pitching. And you did want to mention the starting pitching this weekend.
Yeah. Just to sort of go down each performance, like Cade Anderson pitched really, really well through 5 innings, was dominant, had, I think, 9 of his 10 strikeouts were in the first 5.
And this is against K-State.
This was against Kansas State, which is a pretty good offense. It's probably the best offense they've faced so far. Either them or Dallas Baptist. It's close between those two. And he was pretty dominant. Again, dominant through 5. And then third time through the order is kind of where he had his troubles, similar to what he had in the Omaha game where he gave up his 2 runs that third time through the order. He gave up another 2 runs here, third time through the order in the 6th inning. He got a strikeout for the first out and then gave up 2 solo home runs and came out of the game. Those 2 solo home runs at the time, it tied the game at 2s. And, LSU's offense hadn't totally, gone on the roll that would later go on in that game and in future games. But yeah, like that was a really tight game. And I think for Anderson to take the next step and be that dominant Friday guy, he's got to really sort of lock down with this third time through the order thing. Not exactly sure what the adjustment needs to be. But I mean, part of it's command because it wasn't totally there in that third time through the order against Omaha at the very least. And then, maybe part of it's just like, getting increasing stamina and just like, and not just from just increasing stamina and just like, getting used to throwing deeper and deeper into outings, right? But I think overall it was still a pretty good performance, but that's definitely just something to keep an eye on as we get into conference play. And then with Anthony Ianson, it was a really, really rocky first 3 innings for him. I did not think he was going to get out of the 4th inning, let alone get through 6. And 5 runs to the first 3 innings that he gave up. His command really wasn't there. He was throwing a lot of pitches right over the middle of the plate. Nebraska was just teeing off of it. A lot of singles. But then as the game went along, he sort of found his groove and started locating better, keeping the fastball up in the zone, pairing that with his breaking pitches the bottom of the zone, and if he can tunnel those 2 pitches together where they're both coming out of the same slot and they both look like those pitches look the same, right? Out of the arm slot, when the fastball looks like the breaking ball that's at the knees.
It's one of the how does anybody ever hit that?
Exactly. Yeah, like that's the thing that made Griffin Herring so unhittable, is because no one could tell whether it was a fastball or a slider coming out of his hands, and that tunneling is very important for pitchers, and it's very important for Anthony in order to get his outs because he doesn't have like the most explosive stuff, So command's very, very important for his for what he does to work. So, but you really saw that in the second half of that Nebraska performance. You sort of saw the 2 halves of a potential Anthony Ianson performance, where the command isn't totally there in the first 3 innings. He's getting hit a lot, right? And the margin for error is really, really slim. But when the command is there, like Nebraska has trouble hitting him at all, and LSU, and he's giving he's giving the bullpen rest, and he's giving his offense a chance to come back in the game, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Were you gonna say something? Sorry.
No, go ahead. You're on a roll, man. And then Sunday against Sam Houston, we had
Chase Shores, who honestly kind of struggled with his command. I think that's the best way to put it, because it was surprising to me, and I even talked to a scout about this who was at the game. It was surprising to us that Sam Houston was able to put the ball in play as much as they did and see the ball as well as they did against Chase Shores, despite, again, as we've said on the show a million times, it's 97 with sink at his fastball. 97 with sink, it's a really, really good slider. And when you have that sort of stuff, there's just a much larger room for error, and guys are going to have trouble putting the ball in play. But Sam Houston did a really good job of putting the ball in play. It was all on the ground, which is a good sign. Because if those hard hit balls are fly balls, they're doubles, they're triples, they're home runs. Instead, they were just singles. He only gave 1 extra base hit, but he still gave 4 runs in 5 innings, and that's about as bad as it's going to go because when you give that many ground balls, a lot of them are going to turn to groundouts, right? And in this game, not as many of them turned to the ground, not as many of those hits turned to the ground outs as Jay Johnson and Chase would have liked. So that's definitely just something to sort of keep an eye out for, the swing and miss rate with Chase, and just trying to figure out why he's not missing as many bats as he is, despite going up against a team like Sam Houston, which just isn't very good.
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the world, and the stuff is still there. Like, I mean, I don't think it's a stuff issue more than it is just trying to figure out why he's not missing as many bats, and also part of it's also a command issue. You walk 3 guys, so which is not great in 5 innings,
and that's a problem. But if you're not getting the whiffs, the next best thing is the ground balls.
Yeah,
because as you said, you will allow a few more hits that way than you will on fly balls, but they're only going to be singles, and just law of averages, and you hope your defense plays well behind you. You're going to get ground outs and you're going to get double plays with those ground balls. So I don't think it's and as you said, this was a hitter's environment this weekend in Frisco, and so we saw some of that too. So I think you got to take it with a grain of salt. All in all, a great weekend, a great week for LSU in Texas. The win over Dallas Baptist, I think, is just going to continue to look better and better. As you mentioned, they blew out Oklahoma, who's like borderline top 10 team yesterday. DBU is going to stay in the top 25. K-State, Nebraska, we'll see what they do in their conferences, but they're both solid wins. I really, as we kind of move into our last segment here, I do want to zero in a bit on that Nebraska game. To me, that's the key to the weekend, because you did get kicked in the mouth in those first 3 innings a little bit.
Yeah.
And you had to get up, and then the same thing happened last night against North Dakota State. This ability to rally, to never be out of a game that we've alluded to a couple of times. If you are going to be a top team in college baseball, you've got to have that. And it sure looks like LSU's got that.
And they're not going to come back all the way all the time. No. Like we saw that in the Omaha
in their
game.
loss. Yeah, even in that loss, they're down to Omaha. They're showing nothing on offense. You think, oh, just chalk this one up to a loss. They put the winning run on base in the 9th inning. I mean, they had a chance to win that game.
Yes, exactly. And law of averages says they're not going to come back every single time. So, like, if anyone comes to me and says, "Oh, like they're not the comeback kids, and why did you do this segment on March 5th, March 6th?" Don't come at me, because like this is they're not going to come back every single time, right? It's just the law of averages, but. I think you bring up a good point here with these comebacks, because they have the offense to do it now. Last year, for the most part, they did not have the offense to do it. And one of the reasons why they struggled so much during conference play is because if the pitching staff was struggling at all, and it did struggle more than we expected them to, against these top teams, they just didn't have the offense to stay in the game. And a lot had to do with just the lack, the approaches at the plate weren't quite as good. The patience wasn't quite there, and the experience wasn't quite there. And this year that's different. When, again, we talked about this before the season started, but it's 6 returning starters. It's you're adding veterans out of the transfer portal with lots of experience. A guy like Danny Dickinson, a guy like Chris Stanfield, guys who have 80 to 100 to even more at bats in college baseball. So when you just have as much quality talent as they have, and you sort of combine that with the experience and the returning experience on this team, I'm not saying like this was totally expected with the comebacks in particular, but I think it would have been very reasonable expecting them to be a better offense this season, and that's exactly what you're seeing. And combine that with some of that perseverance, as we've been talking about. I think that's why you're getting these sort of comeback games where they're down 5-0 to Nebraska and the game isn't over. They're down 7-1 to North Dakota State. The game isn't over. They're down 5-0 to Omaha in the 9th inning and the game isn't over. So
no, you don't. You don't want to switch those games off. And like, again, we get it. We're not proclaiming them the greatest rally team of all time or anything.
Yeah.
It's March 5th, but the Nebraska game turns a good weekend into a great weekend. Last night you avoid what would have been a bad loss to North Dakota State. And the ability to do that can turn a good team into a great team. And it's also the attitude. It's like if you're a fan, you're not turning that game off when you're down 5-0 in the 3rd inning, because the team is still in it. And that's even more powerful for the team itself, obviously, in the dugout, knowing, hey, we can go pick our pitcher up. This thing's not over. And I think in conference play, Koki, especially as pitching staffs get worn down facing this offense over a 3-game set,
Yeah.
You're going to see some of that stuff on Sunday in a rubber game of a series. Like, this game's tight or LSU's even behind, and they're not going to be out of that thing Sunday afternoons.
And it's true that the pitching isn't perfect, and it's not great that the pitching has put them in a few of these holes, but they also had the pitching to give the offense the time to come back in the game. This isn't like LSU football in 2023 where, the offense has to score 49 points or else they're going to lose the game. This is not quite that. They are playing some complimentary baseball here where, Zach Cowan comes into last night's game and throws 2 2/3 shutout innings when they absolutely need it. Chandler Dorsey, who hasn't pitched all year, comes in and throws 2 shutout innings. Or in that Nebraska game, like Anthony Ianson picks up himself and throws 3 shutout innings after that tough start, and the bullpen comes in and closes things out with William Schmidt in the 9th inning. So they're playing complimentary baseball, even if the pitching staff has had some slip-ups recently, right? So I think that's like a really, really good sign for this team as we move forward. Like Casey Evans, again, sometimes not even the pitching staff. Sometimes the positional players picking themselves up by playing great defense. Like, we haven't even mentioned the great play at the end of the Kansas State game or the great play in the Nebraska game. The Kansas State play, obviously, it was the double that was hit into the gap that would have been the walk-off RBI double for Kansas State, but Josh Pearson does a great job of cutting the ball off before it gets to the warning track. He turns, makes a perfect throw to Stephen Milam to his glove side, so Milam can quickly get the ball out of his glove and throw it a seed to home plate and throw out the runner who was at first base, who tried to score from first all the way home in the 9th inning against Kansas State. Like, to throw him out there was just absolutely huge, and there's just sort of send the game into extra innings and then win the game 8-5. And then the Nebraska game, I mean, did you see this play? It was just absolutely incredible play.
I have to say, how can you not love Koki Riley's passion for this? This man loves baseball, all right?
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead, describe the play.
Yeah, so it's the 6th inning. They're still down by a run, I'm pretty sure. Nobody on, 1 out. And the Nebraska hitter hits a ground ball up the middle that Dane Dickinson does a good job of just fielding, getting a glove on it. But there was no chance that he was going to be able to plant and throw him out there. So instead of trying to make a potentially ill-fated throw, he just sort of shovels the ball with his glove only as Stephen Milam is running by him because Milam thought he might have had a chance at the ball too. Milam then just catches it with his bare hand, turns, and just throws a seed to first base for the out. And it was
ballet,
beautiful.
man. Yeah, like the coordination and the timing that took. People say baseball players aren't athletes. Come on. I mean, some of them are, but most of them are. So LSU has a good weekend. And I think it's a good sign going forward. Again, are they going to stay number 1? We don't know. I mean, but I think they have a team that could stay in that conversation most of the year. Just to wrap things up, they do play North Dakota State again tonight, and then they get North Alabama this weekend. I was just looking real, cursorily at North Alabama's resume. They're 3-8. They have struggled offensively. They haven't given up a ton of runs, and they played both Auburn and Tennessee and lost
tough
to both.
Schedule, yeah.
But they played them both pretty tough. I think they lost 6-2 to Auburn and 7-5 to Tennessee. And the rest of their schedule, they've only gone 3-6 against. As I said, they've struggled to score some runs. We'll see what they do against this LSU staff, but it seems like a good matchup for LSU to kind of get through the last non-conference weekend, and then you can fully turn your attention to SEC play.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they have Missouri and SEC play, which, I mean, again, no offense, buddy.
Hey, you're talking about the worst team in the SEC by a good bit, at least.
By a very good bit. And then it's UNO in a midweek game, and they're at Texas, which is going to be a very interesting environment, a very interesting series. And I think it's going to go back to the real intensity that we saw in Dallas this past week. We're probably going to see that again in Austin. So it's, these are, I mean, at some point they may lose a game here just because, you're playing so many games in so many days, and some of these teams that they're facing don't have very impressive records.
It's baseball. You're not going to win every game.
Yeah.
You're not winning every game.
Like North Alabama playing close against, Tennessee. And Tennessee is arguably the number 1 team in the country. So, it's just hard to win every game. It's baseball, right? So it's kind of the beauty of it.
Yep, that's right. And we will be back to talk in the near future. Next week's plan at this point, Monday, we're going to do a spring football episode. Spring football gets going Saturday. and then probably maybe slip in some baseball and maybe men's basketball SEC tournament later in the week next week. So for our producer, Alex Lee, he's Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing. This has been the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Help us out, and we will see you next time.